Hi, welcome to the lecture on basic life support. We have already discussed about this in management of medical emergencies and oral surgery. And actually, this lecture is supposed to be a part of your workshop on basic life support. But due to certain unavoidable circumstances, we are not able to conduct the workshop. But still, I would like to do this lecture. I want to just explain it to you as simple as possible. And I believe you have already underwent a workshop on basic life support when you were in Salem. So this is not new to you. So I'm sure you will be able to understand what I'm trying to tell you. And the mannequins are still available in the college. So if you have time, better practice your CPR skills and Heimlich's maneuver in the mannequins. If you have any doubts, you can always ask us. Okay, so let's start. So coming to the learning outcomes, it's just the same like medical emergencies. So let's not go into this. So now today during this lecture, we are going to deal only with CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and Heimlich's maneuver. Okay, so what we need to know is knowledge of basic life support and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, some basic information on medical emergency management, and of course, you should have the training and practice. And you should also know how to contact an emergency medical service, and you should know the average arrival time. So how do you prevent a medical emergency? So you should always have an accurate and complete medical history about the patient who visit your dental clinic, and you should always be ready to modify your treatment because most of the time medical emergencies result because of anxiety. Okay, so you modify your treatment, keep it stress free so that the patient is not too anxious about the treatment, and always be cautious, be aware of all the medical emergencies and its treatment so that when one occurs you should be able to act promptly and do the needful. This is American Society of Anesthesiologists classification of patients. So it's called as an ASA physical status classification. So ASA1 means a patient who is normal and healthy without any systemic disease. And ASA2 is a patient with mild systemic disease, and ASA3 is a patient with severe systemic disease that limits his activity, but it is not incapacitating. He is not bedridden. And ASF4 is patient with incapacitating systemic disease that is a constant threat to life. And ASA5 is a moribund patient not to expected to survive more than 24 years. I mean 24 hours. So then you have ASAE, which comes where the patients who have to undergo emergency operation, though they come under ASAE. Coming to the pathophysiology, first and foremost, what is the purpose of doing cardiopulmonary resuscitation? Basically, we are trying to maintain the blood circulation. Okay, so that the blood circulation is still going on and the brain is receiving sufficient blood because oxygen and glucose is very much essential, and 65% of the glucose and 20% of the oxygen is consumed by the brain, and the cerebral blood flow is around 750 ml per minute at any time, and the brain has around 7 ml of oxygen, sufficient to maintain consciousness for 10 seconds. So when there is inadequate cerebral blood flow, it can lead to reduced cerebral metabolism, which can further lead to the failure of all the most vital organs, leading to death. So unconsciousness management is first is the recognition, that is you should be aware or recognize that the patient is unconscious. Second is assessment. So you need to check for response. So how do you check for response from the patient? You need to create some sensory stimuli. You either shake the patient, call his name loud, see if he is responding, or you can induce some pain, maybe just pinch him or give him a sharp pinprick, see if he is reacting. And if there is a loss of protective reflex, and if the patient is having this inability to maintain a patent airway, then there is a problem. So those are the unconscious patients where you need to be very cautious and you need to act immediately. So what do? Terminate the procedure immediately, summon for help. So when you summon for help, how should it be? So we are checking for not unresponsiveness, it should be responsiveness. So you check for responsiveness. So you shake the patient and call out loud by his name, calling him Mr. or Miss, Are you all right? It should be really loud. Okay, you don't talk to yourself. You really shout out so that the patient, even if he is faintly unconscious, he should be able to hear you. If he is semi-conscious, he might raise your hand, give some reaction saying that, yeah, I'm fine, but not exactly fine. Okay, so you should be really loud. And then you call for help. Use the proper emergency number, call for help. After that, you position the patient. When you position the patient should be placed supine with the thorax and the brain at the same level. Why? Because you need to maintain sufficient blood flow to the brain. And the feet should be 10 to 15 degrees slightly elevated. You're not lifting up the leg completely. It's just slightly elevated so that adequate venous return is maintained. Then you assess and open the airway. So whenever there is a unconscious patient, there is always a chance for the upper airway to get obstructed by falling back of the tongue. So how do you prevent that? You do a procedure called as head tilt and chin lift. You place a for your palm on the forehead of the patient and tilt the head slightly backwards, and at the same time lift the chin up so that in case the tongue is falling back, it will get pulled forward. And in patients who have sustained trauma, okay, and the patient is unconscious, and you don't know whether the patient has got any cervical spine injury, in those patients, if you try to do a head tilt and chin lift, you will end up damaging the cervical spine. So in those cases where you are suspecting cervical spine injury, you do something called as jaw thrust. So jaw thrust, how do you do it? You place your fingers behind the posterior border of the ramus and you pull the mandible forward. You literally try, it's like more like dislocating the mandible. Okay, so this is called a jaw thrust. You pull the mandible forward, which will prevent the tongue from falling back. So this is the first thing you do. You maintain the patency of the airway. So that is head tilt and chin lift. Once you have maintained the patency of the airway, you have to check the breathing. So airway, that is A is done, now is B, breathing. So you have to assess the breathing. How do you check the breathing? You look for the chest movement, you listen for the air escaping during the exhalation, and you feel for the flow of air. So basically you place the side of your face against the nose and mouth of the patient, and your eyes should be looking at the chest. So you look for the chest movement, see if whether the chest is moving, and you listen for the breath sounds coming out through his mouth or nose. And in case he is breathing very feebly, you might still feel it hitting against your cheeks. So you feel for the flow of air. Look, listen, and feel. And if the patient is fine, he's breathing fine, you can place the patient in the recovery positions. Means only the responsiveness is absent, maybe the breathing and circulation is still intact, so you can put the patient in the recovery position. And also you should clear up if there is any foreign body or vomitus obstructing the airway, it should be clear up. So you lower the head and using a suction you can clean the throat, or you can use your fingers to sweep the oral cavity and the throat to remove the foreign body. This will help the patient to protect himself from aspiration. So you are basically preventing aspiration of the foreign object by removing it manually. So then you go for artificial ventilation. Ventilation can be three types. Basically, ventilation means you are ventilating the patient. You are supplying air to the patient so that the oxygen saturation in the patient's blood is maintained. Patient is unable to breathe. So how are you going to supply the air? So there are three types. One is the expired air ventilation, where you use your own expired air. You can place a mask on the patient's face and blow through the mask so that your expired air will supply the required oxygen, and this is called as expired air ventilation. You can use an ambu bag and that will help the patient to get atmospheric air. So this is called as atmospheric air ventilation. Or you can use an oxygen cylinder where fresh 100% pure oxygen is given. So that is known as enriched oxygen ventilation. So now the step 2 is a positive pressure ventilation. You have to deliver positive pressure ventilation. You need to get a leak proof seal. Okay, a leak proof seal means you have to hold the mask in such a way that there is no gap between the mask and the patient's face, so that no air escapes. So when you are using an ambu bag, you squeeze the ambu bag slowly for more than 2 seconds. Observe the chest rise, means the air is going into his lungs and his thorax is expanding. So just that chest rise is the indication for that. And you give ambu bag slowly, give two initial breaths. And there is one more technique called as the Selix maneuver. This is possible if there are multiple rescuers. One person is trying to rescue a patient, trying to give CPR. I don't think they will be able to do this Selix maneuver. Selix maneuver is basically a technique. It's also called as cricoid pressure, where you place your fingers on the cricoid cartilage. Cricoid cartilage is found just beneath the thyroid cartilage. So you place your finger on the cricoid cartilage and you give gentle pressure. So what happens is these cartilages will go and compress the esophagus, which is lying behind the trachea. So why are we doing this? Because when we are administering artificial ventilation, especially with ambu bag, etc., the air tends to go into the stomach through the esophagus. Okay, so the stomach gets bloated, and sometimes when the patient regurgitates whatever is there in the stomach, it comes out, and the patient can aspirate it. So to prevent that, we use this cricoid pressure, where the cricoid cartilage is compressed, which will in turn press against the esophagus and close it. So whatever air you are administering during the artificial ventilation, it won't go into the esophagus. It will go straight into the trachea. And we do something called as positive pressure ventilation. What is this positive pressure ventilation? If there is a positive pressure ventilation, there should be a negative pressure ventilation also. Basically, when you breathe, okay, so when you breathe, you have certain muscles which will help you to breathe. At the same time, your lungs relax, and when they relax, a negative pressure is created within the lungs, and that will pull the air into the lungs. But when a patient is unconscious, he is not able to do this negative pressure ventilation. He is not able to breathe by his own. So you have to push the air from outside. So this is called as positive pressure ventilation. Then you have to check for the circulation. How do you assess the circulation? You check for the carotid pulse. Where do you look for the carotid pulse? So you have the trachea and you have the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and there is a V-shaped groove between the trachea and the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Your fingers need to slide into this groove and you will be able to feel the pulse. Okay, and always keep the head tilt position. Don't make the patient to turn his head on towards one side. Always keep the head tilt position and you check for the carotid pulse, and everything should be done very fast. This airway, checking for breathing, checking for circulation, everything should be done very fast. It shouldn't take more than 10 seconds. Okay, and if you are not able to feel the pulse, don't just keep probing the patient's neck looking for the pulse. It's waste of time. If you are not able to feel the pulse, it means the patient's circulation is not intact. Immediately you need to go for the chest compressions. So that is a logarithm, okay, for emergency management. Coming to the chest compression, so you place the heel of your hand on the midpoint of the sternum, and you exert your body weight. Okay, the patient should be made to lie on a rigid surface, so that when you give pressure, the pressure is used to compress the rib cage or compress the thorax, so that the heart which is within the thoracic cage will get squeezed and the blood is pumped out. And after the compression, you should allow the rib cage to relax. That will help the heart to dilate and the blood will come gushing in. Again, you do the compression, the heart is squeezed. It's more or less like mimicking the systole, and the blood is pumped out. Okay, so how many compressions are we supposed to do? We are supposed to do at least 100 compressions per minute, and the ratio is 30 compressions with 2 rescue breaths. You give 30 compressions followed by 2 rescue breaths. And as I said already, the patient should be placed on a rigid or firm surface, not on a foam mattress. Okay, so if you place the patient in a foam mattress, every time you give the compression, the patient will go down and come up, so it's not going to help. So the patient should be placed on a firm or rigid surface, so that when you give the chest compressions, the rib cage gets squeezed, and you should also allow time for the rib cage to relax. So it is 100 compressions per minute and 30:2 ratio, 30 compressions with 2 rescue breaths. So that's it. That's the graphic image of how to give a chest compressions. And if you see, the operators or the rescuers hand should be held straight. there is no bending of the elbows. Okay, so when you give bending of the elbows, you tend to go down and you will be more or less like exercising your biceps and shoulder muscles rather than doing CPR. So your elbows should be held straight. So there is a algorithm for administering CPR for an infant, and this is the new revised guidelines. Previously, it was ABC, airway, breathing, and circulation. They used to give two rescue breaths and then go for the chest compressions. But now that has been released, it has been changed as CAB, circulation, airway, and then breathing. So first you need to give the chest compressions, followed by the rescue. So these are the various airways that is used to maintain the patency of the airway. The first one on the left is the oropharyngeal airway, also known as Guidal's airway, and the second one is the nasopharyngeal airway. And these all these airways are there in the emergency trolley at the college. Kindly have a look and also just ask the oral surgery staff to show you how to use them. There are pictures, but it will be better you learn it practically. Okay, these are the ambu bags, alright, and various masks. Okay, used for CPR, for administering rescue breaths. And there is a technique called as EC technique. This is basically for just to tell you how to hold the mask. So when you are holding a mask, your index finger and thumb should form a C. The middle finger, ring finger, and the little finger, it forms a E. So the C, that is the index finger, and the thumb should be held around the nozzle of the mask, and the middle finger and the little finger and the ring finger, they will be supporting the mandible. So two fingers are used to support or hold the mask, and the remaining three fingers to support it. You are supporting the mandible, and in this way you will be able to establish a airtight seal. So always remember, this is how you are supposed to hold the rescue mask. So these are the various gadgets or various masks used for oxygen therapy. When you are administering enriched oxygen ventilation, you can use one of this to connect your oxygen tank to the patient's mouth or nose. So you have nasal prongs, simple masks, venturi masks, and rebreathing masks. This is just for your information, just so that you'll have an idea about how it looks like. Anything, and one of the things can be used. So then this is just for information. There is something called as endotracheal tube intubation. For example, a patient is unconscious and you need to ventilate the patient and you need to intubate the patient, intubate the patient for administering artificial ventilation. And for that purpose, you need an instrument called as laryngoscope. Okay, the laryngoscope is an instrument which will help you to depress the tongue. Okay, basically it's used by the anesthetists. They use this for intubating the patient. So they will be depressing the tongue, at the same time they will be able to visualize the vocal cords and the eyelet of the larynx. Okay, the inlet of the larynx. So the and using this instrument you will be able to visualize the inlet of the larynx, and through the nose the endotracheal tube is pushed in and it goes into the inlet of the larynx through the, and that's how you intubate the patient and establish ventilation. Okay, so that picture shows how a vocal cord and the inlet of the larynx looks like. Okay, and that's how you use a laryngoscope. Just pictures to show how to administer CPR. Now we come to Heimlich's maneuver. Okay, so where do you do Heimlich's maneuver? Whenever there is a foreign body obstruction in the upper airway. A patient, say, eating something in a restaurant, suddenly the food gets stuck in the throat and the patient starts gagging and trying to cough it out. So there's never a warning before a person gets an object caught in the throat and start choking. So now the universal sign is the patient will be holding the throat and trying to expel the foreign object out. So that should give you an indication that the patient is choking. There is an obstruction of the airway. So choking is the mechanical obstruction of the flow of air from the environment into the lungs, and choking prevents breathing and can be partial or complete. So Prolonged or complete choking results in asphyxia, which leads to anoxia and is potentially fatal. So, what are the causes of choking? Eating. Okay, is especially eating and laughing at the same time, eating too fast and failing to chew food well enough, and alcohol and drug consumption, which makes the reflexes very poor, and trauma to the head and face. So, bleeding can cause choking, and small objects swallowed by children, like small beads, toys, etc. So, without oxygen, as I said earlier, the brain can begin to die within 4 to 6 minutes. So, it's better you learn Heimlich's maneuver. It's quite a simple technique, but it is life-saving, and it might help you to save the life of a patient, a choking patient. So, what is the protocol? How are you supposed to start? So, when you see a patient who's got a foreign body obstruction in his airway, what are you going to do? Straight away go hold the patient from behind and start administering Heimlich's maneuver? No. First, you ask the patient to cough. If the patient will be trying to cough, we encourage the patient to cough. Sometimes by coughing, the patient will be able to expel the foreign object. Or second, in case the object is not coming out, the patient is still struggling to breathe and is still trying to cough, then you give something called as back slaps. Back slaps means between the scapula, you need to literally slap the patient hard. That vibration will enable the foreign object to dislodge and be expelled out. If backslaps also doesn't work, when you do backslaps, you have to make the patient bend forward a bit. And if that doesn't work, then you go for the abdominal thrust, also known as Heimlich's maneuver. And once you do Heimlich's maneuver, sometimes it won't come out completely, but it will be somewhere inside the oral cavity near the oropharynx region. So just with a simple finger sweeping technique, you will be able to deliver it out. Just directly, you will be able to visualize it. In case it's still not coming out and the patient has gone into unconsciousness, then you have to go in for CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So Heimlich maneuver is the most effective way to remove something stuck in an adult's or older child's throat. So it lifts the diaphragm and forces enough air from the lungs to remove the obstruction. So you apply pressure in such a way that the diaphragm is pushed up, and that will make the lung to release a gush of air, and that gush of air will push the foreign object from the upper airway. So this is as I already said, the person is grabbing the throat with the hand. That is a universal sign for choking. You know that they are gagging, and you hear a weak, ineffective cough, noisy breathing, or high pitched sound. The patient will be wheezing, and patient starts to look blue. So, how do you administer Heimlich's maneuver? You stand behind the choking person and you wrap your arm around his or her waist. You place the thumb side of the fist against the middle of the person's abdomen, just above the navel and well below the ribs. Press your fist into the person's abdomen with quick upward thrusts and repeat the abdominal thrust until the object is coughed out. So basically you stand behind the patient, encircle the patient with your arms, make a fist, okay, and the thumb part of the fist should will be placed against the abdomen just below the ribs, okay, above the navel, below the ribs, and you give upward and backward thrust. It should be quick, fast, okay, and that should create that gush of air which will expel the foreign object, and you keep doing it till the foreign object is expelled out. Okay, so that's how we do it. It's a pictorial depiction, so I guess it's self-explanatory. You can see it and understand by yourself. Okay, what if the patient is pregnant or obese? So when there is a patient with a big tummy, or if the patient is pregnant, you just can't keep your fist above the navel and try to administer Heimlich's maneuver. It's not going to work. And in a pregnant patient, it can be even more dangerous. So rescuers should place their hand in the center of the chest. Okay, it's not on the abdomen, it is placed on the chest to compress and create the pressure. And Heimlich's maneuver as a self-rescue, if you encounter a situation where you are choking upon a foreign object, something which is lodged against your own throat, in your upper respiratory tract, how are you going to get it out? You try to cough it out, or you can place your fist above the navel, and while grasping the fist with the other hand, You lean over a chair or a countertop and or a table and drive your fist towards yourself with an upward thrust and try to cough it out. So in infants less than 3 years, okay, uh, so there you can almost administer Heimlich's maneuver. Okay, but if it is a 1 year old baby, most of the time the patient will cry. That is, infants can cry or cough. So infant is choking and cannot cough, cry or breathe, and follow the Heimlich maneuver like follows. This is more or less for a small infant. Okay, basically it's for a baby below the age of below almost like 1 year old. You place the infant's stomach down across your forearm and give 5 quick forceful blows on the infant's back with the heel of your hand. Or you can place two fingers in the middle of the infant's breastbone and give 5 quick downward thrusts. Basically, the principle here is you create some kind of vibration to loosen the object, and at the same time, or you can just give chest thrust to improve the or increase the pressure, thoracic pressure, so that the air which is gushing out can push the foreign object out. And look into the mouth, check if you can see the object, and remove the object with your finger only if you can see it. Don't keep digging into the patient's mouth, the baby's mouth, or your fingers can injure the oral mucosa and that can lead to infections. Repeat steps 2 and 3 above until the object is expelled or the infant becomes unconscious. The same thing. Keep doing it till the patient, the foreign body is expelled out. Or if the patient has become unconscious, you have to go for a CPR. The infant becomes unresponsive, perform CPR and call for medical assistance. Always remember that following the expulsion of the object, keep the victim still and get medical help. Complications can arise from the incident or from the measures that were taken. So that brings us to the end of this lecture. As I said earlier, this is a part of a workshop. So this won't be complete unless and until you practice all these techniques in the mannequin and get well versed with it. So make use of the mannequins and try to get these techniques clear in your head. Thank you. Thank you very much.